we begin by preparing our bias tape. If you haven't ironed it in half already lengthways, then you want to do that now. One side needs to be slightly shorter than the other, so that when you put it under the sewing machine with the right side of the fabric facing upwards, it totally grips underneath it and you can't have an error there. So that's a very easy method to do it. And also make sure that your linen goes right into the fold so it doesn't slip out. And I'm sure whoever you make this skirt for, she's going to be really happy with it, especially if you use little hearts. And there you can see how well that grips. So the next thing is to do the facings as well. These are the front facings here. You've got 2 of those. And then we are ready to prepare the back. And I'm putting my waistband onto the back. It has a centimetre seam allowance from one side to the other. So all you have to do is sew along it. And because this is video magic, it's already done. Now we're going to prepare the facings for the front. You don't want to sew them on all the way. You start on the side seam, but you leave about 3 centimetres, as you can see me do here. You can mark it with a pin and then you sew from one end to the other. Leave the last little bit free. Do it on both sides. Again, put your facing on. Then sew the seam and iron the seam upwards. Please don't be confused because my facing is actually integral to the skirt. This is my first sample and I decided to do a separate facing after I filmed this. So you want to place your buttonhole about 2.2 centimeters from the left here. That's the edge of the fabric, or should be the edge of the fabric, and 3 centimeters down from the top. My buttonhole is about 0.8 millimeters wide. And what you need to do is place your fabric the same as the rest, or you could use a contrast if you like underneath it. So I just cut myself a square. You don't need to measure this, just something that fits underneath it. And we're going to stitch from the inside with setting 1 all the way around my buttonhole. And the important thing is that when you turn, please do have the needle down. That's a really common mistake to make, that people don't have that, and then you don't get really nice stitching and it will come apart. So I'm going over my stitching again because it wasn't very straight there. And now this is done. All I have to do is cut my buttonhole open. So fold your fabric over, snip through the middle, and then cut into the corners diagonally. And go right into the corners, don't be scared. And now you can pull the fabric through to the other side, which is the inside. Pull it really tightly, and then you move those lips down from the top and the bottom until they meet right in the center, and you get like this fantastic little buttonhole, which looks so complicated, but actually it's quite easy. And everyone that I do this with in the courses is actually telling me this is easy. And that's not always the case. Sometimes I say, oh, it's easy, and they say, no, it's not. But this one really is quite simple. And when they are meeting in the center, then all you have to do is stitch around the buttonhole to make sure that these lips can't move, because they're quite loose on the other side, as you can see. So I've stitched around it now, and all I need to do is cut back this fabric on the inside, and then I can just leave it until almost the end when I finish the skirt. Next, I want to close my side seams. My binding was really wide, so my seam allowance is a bit wider as well, so a little bit over a centimetre, but you should use a centimetre. Seam allowance, that's what I've given in the pattern, and once that's done we are ready to put on our rick-rack. And the hem is 3 centimeters, so you want to mark 1 centimeter more, so 4 centimeters up. I'm always using pencil simply because a pencil is sharp. I don't have to get rid of it afterwards anyway, because the rick-rack is straight on top, and I don't find tailor's chalk very suitable for all my tasks. I'm a fan of pencil. You can rub out pencil as well, just like you would on paper. Then the rickrack is just put over the top and sewn on. You can use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch. And here you can see it's like just a little bit under a centimetre when you fold the hem over, and that's so pretty. Now I'm going to put the next line of rickrack on, and I did it actually by eyesight, but I would really recommend that you then check your eyesight measurement with the tape measure just to make sure it's absolutely perfect. You might want to close your skirt just to check that they really line up, because it is going to be visible. And then we're going to do the final row of rickrack, and again I measured this here, and I think it's 8 centimeters, but whatever your measurement, whatever you like, that's it. Now we can also bias bind the top edge and the hem. I decided to do the top edge with an embroidery stitch, and actually I think that's really cool. The only reason I'm using a blue binding is because I'd run out of the other one, but I do think that's actually looking really nice. I'm quite pleased that I ran out. So next we're going to close our two facings. We need both front facings, and we attach them with a centimetre seam allowance. And once that's done, we will also join the front. So now we can just encase the rickrack really, and it's all clean. I didn't do that on my first skirt, and that's why I decided that a separate facing would be better. So once that's done, you want to do some understitching. So you want to understitch the whole lot. That means stitching on the seam allowance. And once that is done, you just have to sew across the top here. If you're using a fairly stiff linen, like I am using here, you also might want to cut your seam allowance into layers once sewn. So I'm cutting it back a little bit and across the corner. Turn, and you'll see you get a beautiful corner when you do this understitching. If that's not done, it doesn't come quite out like this. It's beautiful. You can also understitch the facing at the top, but you don't have to. Next we're going to do our hem. So all you have to do is fold over, and where you've pencil marked the hem already, you sew across. That's all you do. Very simple. Just follow your pencil line. Once that's done, cut back your seam allowance of the facing, and again cut across the corner a bit so that it's not so thick inside. Turn, and you get a beautiful, beautiful finish. Very professional. I would iron now from the outside my hem before you pin it up. You can at that point do your hem. I've left it to the very end. Could do it now, I suppose. Now we want to finish our buttonhole. Put a pin through to the left side of the fabric and do a mark with your pencil. Then move the pin over to the other side and do another pencil mark on the inside. And then you cut between the pencil marks, obviously doing the diagonal into the corner again, just like you did with a buttonhole. And now you fold back a little bit of the fabric so it sits really nicely on your buttonhole, and just hand stitch this all the way around. It is a very, very simple buttonhole, and if you stitch this back really neatly, it will look very professional, and people will say, "Ooh, did you make that yourself?" And they'll be very surprised. Don't tell them how easy it was. And if you're not quite sure you've quite grasped that technique of the buttonhole, then I would suggest that you do a sample and check it out first. But I do promise you that most of my students really do find this easy. They don't find it difficult, because if you go step by step, it can all be done. And if the inside is not as neatly stitched too, well, you don't see it from the outside, so don't worry about it. And the final step is to create a tunnel for our elastic, and we're going to do that by simply sewing in the seam line that we've already got where we attached the waistband to the back. It's just above the bias binding, and here I've sewn it now and you can hardly see it. Right, final steps now. We need to get our elastic in. Now elastic, there's the rule of thumb that it should be between half the distance of what you're trying to gather and 3/4 of the distance, depending on the thickness of your fabric. So if you have a really thick linen, you might want a shorter elastic because it will really stretch out quite a bit, especially if you top stitch it afterwards. So in that case, you want to go halfway, and if you have a lighter weight fabric, you want to go then halfway again, and that's the length of your elastic. The other option, of course, is to put your elastic in and then put it round your girl and just check, is it the right width? Does it fit comfortably? And that's what you go to. Although there are measurements on the pattern instructions when you buy the pattern, I would just still measure that and try it on the little girl. Leave a centimetre standing one side as you thread it through, and then just stitch in the seam to secure your elastic. Then pull the elastic through to the right width, and again sew down the centre of the seam again from the outside, and then you can cap back your elastic and it's inserted and finished. Next we want to cover our buttons, so it's basically a circle, and you do a running stitch all the way around, and once you've done that, it's quite simple. You just pull that running stitch and put your button inside of it, and then you pull really closely so that the edges are nice and clean. And I would also suggest now, when you put the other part of the button over the top, don't just clip it in arbitrarily, but sort of move all the little pleats that you are bound to get in, so it's really nice and smooth and no pleats can be seen. And then you press the top in and your button is finished and you can sew it on. So you go to the outer corner of your buttonhole, that's where you sew it on. Go all the way through and do it quite a few times. You don't want the button to rip off. It's going to have a lot of strain if a kid's wearing it, so you want to make it really secure. And then you need to put another buttonhole, and I would recommend just a standard buttonhole with a sewing machine on there, so that we can put our under button on. And the rule of thumb really is that a button should start 2 centimeters from the top edge and then 1.2 centimeters from the side. And you need to check that you've got the right size buttonhole. I'm using a smaller button. There's no need to have a huge button on the inside, but I still use the same pattern on the button because I think it's really cute. And mine was 1.75, so that's a good size button. On the top of the skirt, we want to have the big button visible, and on the bottom we'll have the small button. So I open up my buttonhole and then I sew the large button on the top and the small button on the underside. But I sew them on together. If you just have one single little button and you trying to do a wrap skirt, what happens is that pulls away from the facing unless the facing is top stitched to the top part of the skirt, which I don't really like very much. I think that this is much neater. So do your buttons up and go, that's nice. And your skirt's almost finished. Now you have to do the hem. And the key to the hem is really to fold back your seam and then to pick up a few threads of the skirt, and rather more threads from your binding, because you can, it won't be visible. So it's nice and sturdy, and then when you turn that over you can't see a thing. It's a really nice hem. I've also got another style which works with a ruler loop, so if you want to give that a go or have a look at it, then please go to the link. Thank you for watching, everyone.